I hesitated for just a second before picking up the phone, already bracing myself for another unpleasant exchange. Paul often called me at the worst possible times, but this time was different. The lines of worry etched across my face deepened as I answered. "What is it now, Paul?" "I hate to break it to you, but my girlfriend is pregnant." His voice was flat, emotionless. "She's 18 years younger than me. I guess what I'm saying is, I'm leaving you, Anna. Getting a divorce. That's cool with you, right?" I gripped the phone tighter, the edges digging into my palm. My other hand involuntarily clenched into a fist, an outward display of the inner turmoil I was struggling to suppress. After years of tension and disappointment, I should have been prepared for something like this. But the sheer audacity of his request left me momentarily speechless. Before I could formulate a response, my thoughts were interrupted by a more pressing concern: the well-being of our son, or rather my stepson, Sam. At 16, he would be far from oblivious to the goings-on in our suddenly fractured household. He had always been a sensitive kid, finely attuned to the fault lines of our family. As if on cue, a soft knocking came from the door of the study, the only room I considered mine in the sprawling house that Paul and I shared. "Mom, is everything all right?" It was Sam's voice, tinged with the worry that I had come to recognize all too well. Momentarily neglecting Paul, who was still droning on about something or another, I softened my voice and replied, "I'll be out in a minute, sweetie. Just wrapping up a call." Turning back to the matter at hand, I found my voice. "Listen, Paul, we'll discuss the divorce later. What's most important now is Samantha. If we're going through with this, you need to take responsibility for him. For now, please just let this settle before you do anything else rash." There was a pause on the other end, and then an exasperated sigh. "Anna, don't start with this. He's your kid, too." Technically, he was right, but the unpleasant truth, and perhaps my most powerful card, was still tucked tightly against my chest, a reminder of the complex emotional and legal dynamics that had bound our little family together. The silence on my end seemed to unnerve him, and he blurted out, "You know what? Fine, we'll talk about this later." And with that, he hung up. Releasing a sigh I hadn't realized I was holding, I placed the phone down and pinched the bridge of my nose, an ineffectual attempt to fend off the headache brewing just beneath the surface. Sam was waiting just outside the door when I emerged, his eyes searching mine for an explanation I wasn't yet ready to provide. I mustered a reassuring smile and looped an arm around his shoulders, guiding him back to the living room. "Let's not worry about that call," I said, although we both knew that was a near impossibility. "Why don't you tell me about your day instead?" And as he launched into a story about his latest project in art class, I clung to the normalcy of our conversation like a lifeline, knowing full well that the storm clouds were gathering just beyond the horizon. That night, as the house lay quiet and shadows played against the walls from the street lamps outside, my mind began to drift back in time. The memories came unbidden, a cascade of moments revealing a completely different version of the man I had married. I settled into my armchair, a relic from my pre-Paul days, and let the past unravel itself. I was 27 when I met Paul, an independent marketing expert with a penchant for brand revival. He came to me as a client, but soon became more. We were both rebounding from past relationships. Mine was a tale of young love that burned out too brightly, and his was a marriage wrecked by infidelity. It didn't take long for Paul to sweep me into a whirlwind romance, complete with tender looks and promises of always putting family first. His son, whom he had full custody of, was named Sam. At the tender age of 3, the boy had a mop of curly hair and eyes so wide they seemed to swallow the world around him. Paul would bring him along on our dates, saying, "Just until we find a good sitter." But as time went by, it became an unspoken arrangement, one that didn't bother me as much as I thought it might. Despite my initial reservations, there were fleeting moments where our trio felt like a glimpse of the family life I'd never known I wanted. It was both cozy and exciting, and I began to think that perhaps I could step into this role that the universe had seemingly carved out just for me. So when Paul proposed a year into our relationship, presenting not only a ring but a family unit, I said yes, with hardly a second thought. but the rosy glow of new marriage faded with startling rapidity. As soon as our honeymoon was over, literally and metaphorically, the real Paul began to surface. His facade of a doting father cracked and fell away, leaving behind a man who seemed increasingly indifferent to his son's existence. Work was always his convenient excuse. Even when the underlying note of sadness in Sam's voice couldn't be missed, Paul would shrug it off, leaving me to soothe away the sting of abandonment. I tried to voice my concerns, but Paul's temper flared up easily. "It's not your place," he would say, dismissing my attempts to navigate a healthy dynamic between father and son. As time wore on, I tried to be everything Sam needed, steadfast and present, unlike his father. I attended school plays alone, cheering twice as loud to make up for the space where Paul should have been. And with every small absence, with every unkept promise, a bitter seed of resentment took root in my heart. Now, in the subdued light of my living room, as sleep teased at the edges of my consciousness, I couldn't help but wonder when exactly my marriage had slipped from being a partnership to a performance, and at what point I had lost myself in this charade of family life. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting lines of light and shadow across my face. I took a moment to steel myself for whatever trials the day might bring, after last night's revelations. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. Sam was still asleep, his door ajar and his breathing steady. I let out a quiet sigh of relief that he could at least find some peace during these turbulent times. The urge to protect him from the incoming storm was visceral, but I could not hide forever behind a facade of calm domesticity. Hesitantly, I revisited the idea of returning to work, part-time at least. It wasn't just about the money, although our family's financial future was uncertain with the looming divorce. It was about regaining a semblance of the independence I had once taken for granted. I remembered my conversation with Paul about this a few years back. "A part-time job?" Paul had scoffed, slouched on the couch with a beer in hand. "What's that for? Some pocket money for shopping?" His laughter still echoed in my mind, a bitter reminder of his condescension. "It's for Sam." I had shot back, my voice firm. "He's growing up, and there are expenses, school supplies, extracurricular activities, and I want to help." Paul's only response had been a shrug before he dimmed the room with the TV's glow. But the next morning, when his head was clearer, he had grudgingly agreed, tossing the declaration at me like it was a breadcrumb. And so I slipped back into a familiar role in the marketing world, but on my own terms. My former boss had welcomed me back with open arms, aware of the tumultuous tide I was navigating at home. The balancing act was taxing, juggling domestic duties with the demands of work, but it provided a lifeline. A reminder that I was more than just someone's cast-off wife. It felt invigorating to reclaim a piece of my identity. That liberation was cut short one evening when my work commitments saw me arriving home later than usual to find Paul pacing in the foyer, a snarl twisting his lips. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I was at my part-time job," I replied, weary and not in the mood for another confrontation. "Meeting some man, right?" He seized my arm, his fingers biting into my skin. "Is that it, Anna? Tell me!" The absurd accusation struck me like a slap. Paul's distrust was a grotesque mirror that reflected his infidelities, not mine. I wrenched my arm away from his grip, denial falling from my lips in heated, vehement waves. But Paul, never one to back down, demanded to see my phone, to delve into the intricacies of a life he so often shunned. I watched frozen as he dialed my boss's number, that single action shattering any facade of trust we might have still shared. I could have drowned in the silence that followed my boss's clear-cut clarification. Paul's lame attempt at an excuse was nothing more than a shrug and a suggestion that I should have been more careful, if only to save him the embarrassment. Since then, my days were colored with a rising dread of future altercations, a dread that had seeped steadily into my heart, setting up residence alongside the growing hollow of my love for Paul. Now, as I sat upright in my armchair, a cup of cold coffee abandoned on the table before me, the inevitability of our situation settled heavily upon my shoulders. We were past the point of repair. The notion of us existed now only in the fragmented memories of a time when I believed in the possibility of a happy ending. As the days slipped by in an unsettled quiet, life took on a stuttering rhythm. I tried to protect Sam from the growing tensions while I navigated the minefield that my marriage had become. I felt a cold knot at the pit of my stomach every time I caught sight of Paul's car parked outside, his comings and goings now as erratic as his moods. One afternoon, my work took me near Paul's corporate office, a swanky high-rise that seemed to scrape the clouds. A familiar, prickling discomfort grew within me as I walked by. Even after all these years, I had never quite come to consider that towering glass monolith as a part of my world. It was Paul's territory, a place where I had little reason or desire to venture until now. As fate would have it, I caught sight of Paul's car parked across the street. There was a figure seated beside him, unmistakable by its youthfulness and the animated gestures that accompanied a fit of laughter between them. With a heavy heart, I realized this must be the younger girlfriend, the one carrying his child. My hands shook with a volatile mix of anger and anxiety as I snapped a picture. I didn't know what I intended to do with it, but the private investigator my friend had mentioned once seemed like a good place to start. Secrecy wasn't something with which I was comfortable, yet the situation seemed to call for it. As the evidence of Paul's duplicity gathered in the hands of the PI, a morbid sense of satisfaction intermingled with my pain. It was ironic how the truth often surfaces when one starts digging in the right places. At home, Sam's obliviousness was a mercy and a curse. The moments we shared, him asking for help with his college applications or discussing his art projects, were pockets of normalcy that kept me anchored. Yet the looming specter of the truth felt heavier by the day. How long could I keep this all from him, and when the time came, how would he view his father, or me? Paul seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, too consumed by his extramarital escapades to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Our interactions were stilted, and more often than not, he wore an expression of annoyance that would crescendo into aggression if pressed. It was during one of these strained conversations that the dam finally broke. Clutching the preliminary report from the PI, I let my gaze harden when I addressed him. "I don't know which is worse," I started, the frost in my voice matching the icy glare I fixed on him. "The fact that you're cheating, or that you were so sloppy about hiding it." Paul's reaction was a bizarre blend of shock and defiance. "What are you talking about, Anna?" "I'm talking about your barely legal mistress and the baby that you claim is yours." I pushed the paper across the table, watching as his eyes darted over the incriminating photos and the sterile, typed-up accounts of his infidelity. The room went dead silent for a second too long before I eventually added, "You're going to need to take better care of Sam. He's your responsibility, Paul." "You can't mean that," Paul retorted weakly. "What about everything we've been through?" I mustered the full force of my resolve when I addressed him, the cut of betrayal slicing through each word. "Because, Paul, as much as I love Sam, I've never legally adopted him. He's not my child, he's yours with your ex-wife." Paul's stunned silence was answer enough. The truth hung between us an unscalable wall. It was a final acknowledgement of a relationship that had been fraying at the seams long before his affair. In the quiet aftermath, I slipped silently out of the room and made my way to the one place I now considered an asylum, Sam's room. His earnest smile and oblivious chatter were the only consolation I had left in the ever-complicating mess of my married life. Sitting at the kitchen table the next morning, I sipped my tea, staring at the steam curling upwards like wistful spirits seeking escape from their liquid confines. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that seems to press against your ears. A silence ripe with words not yet spoken, truths not yet revealed. There was a knock at the door, solemn and perfunctory. It was Paul, his face a grim mask of confrontation, his jaw twitching with pent-up frustration. In tow was Emma, the young woman whose involvement with my husband had upended my life. Her belly was now showing the early signs of pregnancy, and she moved with the tentative touch of someone navigating new terrain. "Anna," Paul began, "we need to talk." The frigid air between us crackled with tension as I remained silent, nodding slightly for him to continue. With hesitant boldness, Emma spoke up. "I've heard a lot about you. And Sam. He's a good kid, right? You've been parenting him for over a decade." "Indeed," I replied coolly. "Sam is a remarkable young man." Then why abandon him now? Emma's voice wavered slightly, betraying her underlying apprehension. The question stung, but I kept my composure. It's not a matter of want, Emma. Legally speaking, he is not my child. I could see the confusion in her eyes, her furtive glances at Paul searching for reassurance or explanation. Paul, seemingly prepared for a different outcome, appeared lost. But we're married, Anna. Isn't that enough? No, it's not, I said firmly. To make a stepchild one's own, one must legally adopt them. I never did. Adoption? Emma frowned, the concept foreign to her. Exactly, I continued. Without that, I have no claim over Sam, no obligations or rights. Paul's face paled. What does this mean for us, then? It means you're fully responsible for Sam's upbringing. I am not abandoning him, but I cannot, in good legal conscience, take him with me. Your actions have consequences, Paul. There was a pause as the weight of my words settled over us like a shroud. Look, this is a mess, I concluded, standing up. I'm willing to discuss a fair divorce settlement, but Sam's care is not negotiable. He's your son. The conversation ended with Paul's defeatist surrender. Emma's protests were cut short by a simple, yet stern look. They left in a huff, the door closing behind them with a decisive click, the sound echoing the closing chapter of our marriage. It was only after their car was out of sight that I allowed myself a single solitary tear. My grief was not for the loss of Paul, already a ghost in my heart, but for the upheaval that Sam's life was about to undergo. I vowed then and there to protect him as much as I could, no matter the legal ties that bound or separated us. Days passed in a haze of legal consultations and muted emotions. I navigated through them with the determination of someone who knows there's no turning back. Every ring of the phone, every knock on the door, I was braced for another battle, another bitter exchange. In a strange turn of the tide, Paul's inevitable retaliation came not in the form of tantrums or threats, but with him dragging Emma into the sanctity of our home. The tension was thick, a tangible entity as they stood there, a united but unstable front. Anna, Paul began, urgency bordering on desperation clouding his voice. You can't just back out and let everything fall apart because our situation changed. I could only nod, urging him to continue while mentally preparing my counter-argument. I was not going to be swayed by emotional pleas or twisted logic. Emma, her arms protectively cradling her unborn future, found her voice amidst the unease. Surely there's a way you can keep Sam. You were his mother for so long. Her words hung in the air, and I felt a pang of sympathy for her, caught in the crossfire of our crumbling marriage. Emma, I did not abandon Sam. Paul did when he chose to pursue a relationship outside of our marriage. One cannot just discard responsibilities because it's inconvenient, I replied, my voice even but firm. The legality of my relationship with Sam is clear. No formal adoption, no parental rights. It's always been that way. The confusion in Emma's eyes mirrored the same dawning realization I saw in Paul's. It was then I decided to divulge the final nail in their contrived coffin. I retrieved the folder containing the evidence of Emma's infidelity, the product of the private investigator's thorough work. Her breath hitched audibly as she scanned the photos and accompanying reports. This child, I began, placing an incriminating photo of Emma with a man not Paul on the table. It doesn't belong to you, does it, Paul? Silence consumed the room as Paul's gaze fixated on the photograph, slowly twisting from confusion to anger. He rounded on Emma with glaring accusation. Is this true? His voice was barely above a whisper, but each word was laced with betrayal. Emma's stammered denial, negated by the evidence before her eyes, only fueled Paul's fury. You led me on. Paul's words were venomous, his expression an amalgam of rage and hurt. Observing the scene unfold with a detached, academic interest, I felt the chains of my marriage finally slacken. Do what you must with each other. Sam and I will adapt, as we always have. I expect you'll do the same, I uttered with finality, excusing myself from the brewing storm. As I made my way to the haven of my study, their heated exchanges muffled by the closed door, I focused on the sound of my steady breaths and the knowledge that Sam and I would face brighter days ahead. It was not the end of our story, merely the beginning of a new chapter. In the wake of the crumbling illusions and the raw truths laid bare, my thoughts turned toward the future with a steely resolve. It was within the confines of my study, among the legal pads scribbled with thoughts and potential strategies, that I formulated my next steps. A decisive course of action was necessary, both for Sam's well-being and for my emancipation from the life I had known. I reached out to my attorney, a meticulous and forthright woman named Miss Carter, who had been a guardian angel of sorts throughout this ordeal. "It's time to discuss the terms of the divorce and the division of property," I told her over a secure line, each word a hammer driving nails into the coffin of my marriage. Miss Carter assured me she would arrange for us to move forward with pragmatic efficiency, and I trusted her implicitly. Preparing for this legal battle was like bracing for a storm. Security measures were a necessity, not a luxury. Within days, a meeting was orchestrated to discuss the partition of our lives into neatly quantifiable assets and liabilities. Paul's disposition fluctuated between anger and spiteful acquiescence. But through it all, I remained firmly anchored to my objectives. As if play-acting the part of the dutiful wife one last time, I served coffee and brought out the ledger of our once shared existence, slipping into the uncomfortable but familiar role of his domestic partner. Trying to eke out my dignity from our divide was akin to navigating a boat through rocky shoals, each potential compromise on material possessions a risk that might capsize an already unstable situation. But Sam's future was the lighthouse guiding me. Everything I did was to ensure he would not be left adrift in the wake of our split. Paul hesitated, his expression a mask of consternation as we discussed alimony and the financial stipulations going forward. "How can we possibly unwind everything we've built?" he asked, a note of plea underlying his usual assertiveness. "We can, and we will," I assured him, my tone laced with an undercurrent of fatigue. "It's not just about us anymore." The air grew colder, the silence starker, as we both signed the papers that would render our shared history into nothing more than a transaction, an exchange of worldly goods and bruised promises. I hesitated only once, my pen hovering over the document as the finality of it all settled into my bones. Each stroke of my signature was a release, a liberation from the ties that no longer served me, or Sam. As Paul left, his departure was without the dramatic flourish of our past arguments. Instead, a quiet, anticlimactic exit that allowed the gentle closing of the door to serve as his final goodbye. Retreating to the solace of my solitude, I reflected on what it meant to let go, to relinquish the dreams of what could have been for the reality of what must be. In the quiet aftermath, a newfound sense of pride welled within me. I would steer my destiny with a steady hand, come what may. The jagged edge of reality set in as I sat at my vanity, staring into the mirror at the woman I had become. A woman hardened by betrayal, but not broken by it. With each brushstroke through my hair, I steeled myself for the confrontation to come. I was tired of the shadow games and half-truths. It was time to drag everything into the light. Donning my armor of a charcoal business suit that accentuated my newfound resolve, I arrived at Paul's place of work, a towering testament to his professional success and personal failures. Blending into the anonymous flow of the city's morning hustle, I passed through the revolving doors of his corporate fortress with one objective: to ensure there would be no further avoidance or delays in the settlement of our divorce. Paul's supervisor, Mr. Green, was a man I had met but a few times, always in the periphery of company galas and charitable events. His demeanor carried the gravity of someone who understood the weight of his position, and as I sat in the waiting area of his office, I folded my hands, ready to lay out my case. The door to Mr. Green's office opened, and Paul's figure appeared, confusion marring his otherwise stern features. He had clearly been interrupted, pulled from whatever business matters had occupied his day. I could sense his annoyance, but the burning urgency in my gaze was enough to silence whatever complaint he might have vocalized. Mr. Green extended his hand, a practiced smile affixed to his face as he addressed me. "Miss Simmons, what brings you to our office today?" I took a deep breath, framing my thoughts into coherent sentences. The matter at hand is personal, but it has reached a point where I can no longer wait for my soon-to-be ex-husband to do the right thing. Our divorce must proceed, and I need assurance he will cooperate. Paul stiffened, his eyes darting to Mr. Green, then back to me. It was clear he had never anticipated our private discord intersecting with his professional life. "Please understand, Mr. Green, I continued. My visit here is not to scandalize or to seek retribution, but to move forward with transparency and closure. The air between us was charged, the hum of company operations outside Mr. Green's door now a distant murmur. I watched as Mr. Green considered my words, his expression morphing from one of cordiality to concern. I assure you, Mr. Green, I finished, that our personal grievances will not impact Paul's responsibilities here at the company. I am merely seeking resolution so we may both proceed with our lives. Paul's protests were interwoven with pleas for discretion, but the truth couldn't be simpler. We were beyond the point of secrets and saving face. With a nod, Mr. Green assured me he would encourage Paul's cooperation. The meeting adjourned with a heavy finality, leaving me to navigate my way back out into the bustle of the city. As I walked, the gravity of my actions began to sink in. I had walked into the lion's den unflinching, laying bare the truth to the powers that would most impact Paul's decision-making. It wasn't long before news of the scandal made its way through the office grapevine. Paul and Emma's illicit relationship, once shrouded in whispers, was now cast into the unforgiving light of day. Emma's position within the company, intertwined as it was with her personal entanglements, became unmanageable. The fallout was swift and irrevocable for both of them, their reputations tarnished and their professional standing compromised. I returned home to the quiet of my study, allowing myself the brief luxury of unraveled composure. The sky outside was overcast, heavy with unreleased rain, a mirror to my own emotional state. Paul and Emma's fate was no longer my concern. I had severed the ties that bound me to their downfall. It was time for me to focus on the path ahead, to embrace whatever came next, with eyes wide open and heart slowly mending. Now, with the anticipation of an uncertain future tingling at my fingertips, I prepared myself for the next chapter, one that I would author on my own terms. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of change and, unexpectedly, hope. I was offered a full-time position at the marketing firm where I had found solace in part-time work, a lifeline that became a vessel for transformation. Gripping the opportunity with both hands, I dove into the work I loved, allowing it to support and reshape the newfound life that Sam and I were building. Sam was navigating his own changes, adapting to the shifting landscape of our family structure with a maturity beyond his years. Discussions of college applications and plans for the future became our new anchor points as we forged ahead in unison. One evening, as the soft glow of the sunset bathed the living room in warmth, Sam approached me, hesitant yet excited. "Mom," he began, "there's someone I want you to meet. I'm seeing someone, and, well, I think you'll like her." His words touched a tender spot within me. Even as he spoke, he fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "Sam, I'd be delighted to meet her," I assured him, my heart swelling. "But are you sure you're okay with me being there? I mean, after everything." He stopped me with a look, a knowing, reassuring gaze. "Mom, no matter how things ended with Paul, you were always there for me. You're my family. I want you to be part of this." As we shared a warm embrace, I realized that our bonds were indeed stronger than I had ever dared to hope. Sam's resilience and love gave me the strength to be the parent he deserved, regardless of any legal definition. With the official divorce proceedings behind us, my life took on a different rhythm, one filled with promise and productivity. The undertow of loneliness that often accompanied my nights slowly ebbed away, replaced by a sense of peace and fulfillment. Sam's presence was a constant reminder of the continuity of love and care I had provided over the years. Our interactions became less about filling the gaps left by Paul and more about celebrating each milestone, each victory, no matter how small. The college acceptance letter arrived like a beacon of triumph, its crisp white envelope holding so much more than just words. Inside was validation of Sam's talent, determination, and the future he was destined to seize. As he read the contents aloud, his voice crackled with emotion, and I felt my own chest tighten with pride. My own eyes grew misty as he looked up at me, the joy in his face mirrored in my own smile. This was our victory, one made sweeter by the struggles we had overcome. Whatever lay ahead, I knew we would face it together, buoyed by the understanding that family is not merely defined by blood, but by the shared experiences and unconditional support that bonds us. And as Sam set his sights on the horizon, ready to embrace college life and all the challenges it would bring. I stood by, ready to support him as I had always promised, as I would always do. With each passing day, the woman I saw in the mirror grew stronger, surer, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit forged in the fire of adversity and emerging, triumphant and hopeful, into the light of a new beginning. Months melded into a new kind of normalcy, the raw wounds of the past now healing into scars, reminders of battles fought and strength earned. In the solitude of my revitalized life, news of Paul and Emma reached me only in fragments, echoes of the life I had left behind. Through conversations with Mr. Green, whom I had come to regard as an ally in the corporate world, I learned that the once cohesive front Paul and Emma had presented had crumbled into a spectacle of blame and acrimony. The affair, once shrouded in secrecy, was now a specter that haunted their professional and personal lives with equal persistence. Their relationship buckled under the weight of public scrutiny and personal betrayals. Without the security of established careers at Paul's company, they found themselves adrift in a sea of their own making. The court battle over Emma's claims of emotional abuse and her subsequent demands for compensation was a drawn-out affair, leaving them both exposed and vulnerable. In the end, it was not just their careers that suffered a fatal blow, but their relationship too. Emma, still pregnant and now shouldering the disdain of her family, retreated from the public eye and the ire of her once lover. Paul, meanwhile, found himself unemployed at an age where starting over was more of a challenge than a prospect. Reports suggested he eventually settled for a part-time position at a local store, a shadow of his former glory. As these whispers of their struggles reached me, I found myself reflecting not with malice, but with a somber acknowledgement of life's unpredictable tides. There was no joy in their downfall, only the quiet affirmation that every choice leads us down a path of our own making. For Sam and me, the path was one of growth and newfound harmony. As he embarked on his college journey, I watched him navigate his newfound independence with the same resilience and integrity that had seen him through the chaos of our fractured family life. It was a bittersweet farewell when I dropped him off at his dormitory, but one filled with the promise of his bright future. Back in the fortress of my own rebuilding, surrounded by the familiar comforts of a home that had seen too much yet stood resilient, my career flourished. Returning as a full-time employee had reignited a passion that I had thought lost, infusing my days with purpose and fulfillment. In moments of solitude, I would sometimes catch myself marveling at the strength and serenity that had grown from the ashes of my previous life. There was a newfound sense of self that permeated every aspect of my existence, a calm confidence that whispered assurances of the possibilities that lay ahead. In the evenings when the golden glow of sunset bathed my garden in its warm embrace, I would think of Sam's parting words, that regardless of our lack of legal tie, I had always been and would always remain his true parent, in every sense that truly mattered. It was in these quiet moments that I knew the love and bonds we shared transcended all else. Our narrative had been one of trials and transformation, with the final pages yet to be written. Together and yet apart, we moved forward into our separate futures. A son stepping boldly into the world he would shape, and a mother standing proud, her resolve unshaken, ready for whatever chapters were yet to come.
My name is Freya, and I'm about to turn 25 this year. I've been happily married for 4 years, and my son, William, just celebrated his 4th birthday. When I first got married, I worked full-time, but now I balance part-time work at the same company. My husband, Henry, is 27 years older than me. Our relationship started with Henry being the one to pursue me passionately, but after we got married, I noticed a shift in his attitude, where he became more controlling. Henry has a sister, Aria, who is 23 years old. There's a bit of an age gap between them, and it seems that Henry tends to spoil her a little. Before we got married, I didn't mind Aria visiting often. I thought it was just a normal sibling bond, and I assumed they got along well. But after we tied the knot, I started noticing some changes in Aria's behavior. She began showing up at our place without calling first, expecting to be treated like a guest without ever offering to help or show any appreciation. What bothered me more was Freya's response. Instead of addressing the situation with Aria, he would expect me to accommodate her every time. Arya would come in, barely acknowledging me, and just casually say to Henry, "Hey, I'm here again," like it was completely normal. Even though I wasn't prepared to host another guest, I ended up serving dinner to her. Henry, instead of understanding the situation, would blame me out loud, saying I should have been more considerate. Arya would apologize, but it was clear she enjoyed Henry's favoritism. After dinner, while Henry and Arya sat chatting on the sofa, I was left with the leftovers. I had to make my own meal, and they didn't even acknowledge me or William. It felt like we were just there to serve them, not treated as family. One evening, as I was about to take a bath with William, Henry loudly interrupted, asking me to go buy a cake for Arya, even though it was already late. Arya insisted she wanted it right away, and Henry blamed me for the delay. Feeling pressured, I reluctantly agreed to go to the cake shop with William. As we walked, I overheard them criticizing me, calling me inconsiderate, and questioning why Henry even married me. Although William didn't understand the conversation, he could feel the tension between Henry and me. Trying to keep things light, I asked him what kind of cake he wanted, and he happily responded that he wanted one with lots of fruit. Our trip to the cake shop was full of cake talk, which for a moment helped me forget about the negative things Henry had said earlier. We made it to the shop just before closing time and managed to find the cake Arya wanted. We also bought the fruit cake that William had asked for. When we got home, I served the cakes to Henry and Arya, and then I made William's cake and took it to the dining room. The moment I placed his cake in front of him, Arya pointed at it and said she wanted that one. Before I could say anything, Henry moved William's cake in front of Arya, ignoring William's protests. Henry justified his action by saying he had paid for the cakes with his own money, so he had the right to choose for William. I couldn't hold my feelings in anymore. I told Henry how unfair it was, and in response, he threatened divorce. William, who had stopped crying, nervously grabbed my hand. After a moment, he said, "Mom, I also like cake with strawberries on it." It's really good, as he ate the cake Arya had wanted. Seeing that William was going through so much, I decided to take him away from the situation. I moved him to another room, so he could enjoy his cake peacefully. Henry apologized to Arya, saying he was sorry for being so stingy, but I held back, not wanting to argue in front of William. Watching William enjoy his cake, so happy and innocent, brought me some comfort. After we finished the cakes, we decided to take a late bath and sleep in William's bed. The next morning, when I was preparing breakfast, I realized Arya had already left. But soon, I heard William crying. To my shock, I found that his piggy bank, a gift from my father, had been broken and all the money he had saved was gone. William, who always said goodnight to his piggy bank, was heartbroken. When I asked Henry about it, he casually explained that Arya needed some money, so she had taken it from the piggy bank. Holding my crying, shaking son, I felt his pain so deeply that I couldn't help but cry with him. It hurt to see how much Henry was focused on taking care of his sister, Arya, over our own son. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I was angry and sad, so I confronted Henry, breaking my usual habit of staying silent during arguments, especially in front of William. Without saying a word, Henry walked into the bedroom and returned holding something shocking: divorce papers. I was stunned to find that Henry had been secretly hiding divorce papers, something I had no idea about. In an outburst, he shoved the papers at me and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. William, who had never cried about the issues between Henry and Arya before, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He cried non-stop since last night, and it broke my heart to see him like this. Feeling the weight of the situation, I suggested that we skip daycare for the day. To my surprise, William happily agreed, with a faint smile on his face. We spent the day together playing and bonding. William brought a picture book from the shelf, climbed onto my lap, and happily pointed to the teacher in the book, saying, "Mama, right? He looks like an angel." His little heart seemed full of patience, and in that moment, I decided to make the day special. I took a day off from work, despite the possible trouble it might cause at my job. My workplace understood the situation and kindly granted me the day off. We spent the morning at the park, playing hide and seek, having fun in the sandbox, and sliding down the slides. When we got back home for lunch, William looked sleepy. Normally, he would nap on his own, but today he fell asleep in my lap, just like when he was a baby. I had planned to use the time to do some household chores, but today felt different. Instead of cleaning, I decided to enjoy the peaceful moment and let myself be healed by the sight of William's calm, sleeping face and gentle breathing. Just as I was settling into this serene moment, I heard a noise from the front entrance. The door had opened, and since it wasn't the usual time for Henry to come home, I became suspicious. I quickly hid in the bedroom closet, holding William tightly. A voice echoed through the house, and to my surprise, it was Arya. I listened as she moved through the house, sounding frustrated as she searched for something. After a while, she made a phone call, mentioning Henry and talking about their failed search. I could hear her locking the front door as she left. Once I felt it was safe, I put William back to bed and sat down to think about what had just happened. I couldn't understand why Arya had entered our house, or what they had been looking for. Suddenly, Henry felt like a stranger to me, and I was filled with disgust and fear. Quickly, I packed some essentials for William and me and headed to the train station. We took a train to my parents' house, which was thankfully just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, they could tell something was wrong just by looking at my face. They welcomed us without asking questions. Once we were settled, I told my parents everything about Henry, Arya, and the strange things that had been happening. I explained how I didn't feel safe staying at our house anymore. My mother suggested that Arya might have been searching for my belongings, possibly cash cards. As I thought about it, I recalled my past experience as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. When I got married, I handed over the business to trusted friends so I could focus on raising my child. Though I still worked part-time and kept in touch with the company, Henry had no idea that I was still the CEO. I remembered the divorce papers Henry had hidden, and I began to suspect that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. Although I had told him that I still received some money from the company, I had kept the details of my savings and my role as CEO private. Over time, I realized that Henry struggles with managing money and tends to spend all that he earns. Early in our marriage, Henry only gave me $200 a month for food, and even suggested that I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. But with the financial strain of raising William and barely having enough for food, I never agreed to stay home. Eventually, Henry reluctantly allowed me to work part-time. To keep him from asking for more money, I signed a post-marital property waiver through a lawyer, and since William was born, I've used my savings to cover his nursery fees and buy him clothes. Even though I only received $200 for food, I never asked Henry for more money. He must have assumed I had savings, especially considering Arya's apparent need for money. I also thought they might have been looking for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account for William, into which a portion of my salary is deposited every month. But I always carry my valuables with me, so they won't find anything if they were searching for it. What was even more troubling was the idea that Arya might be coming into our house when we weren't there, and Henry might be letting her. My father suggested that I store my valuables, including the cash cards, in their safe for now. As I thought about their need for money, William came over to my father, crying over his broken piggy bank and the promise he had made to save money. My father, furious about what had happened to William's piggy bank, vowed to call Henry. My mother suggested that I try to figure out what Henry and Arya were after. She pointed out that Henry might try to shift the blame to us, making the divorce more favorable for him. I decided to act calmly and find out what their true intentions were. I planned to secretly record their conversation. My father's lawyer friend also offered to help. When we returned home, I started cooking dinner while keeping my phone screen down, ready to record. It wasn't long before Henry arrived home, and to my surprise, he immediately asked about my cash cards. When I asked him about it, he gave vague answers, clearly trying to deceive me. When I remained silent, Henry grew more agitated. He demanded that I give him all of my part-time earnings for his sister. I refused and calmly explained that the money was for William's savings. In response, Henry angrily shoved the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for William. He even said something that made my heart drop. He valued Arya more than our own son. Hearing this, I couldn't continue preparing the meal. I stopped, put the divorce papers in my bag, took William's hand, and walked toward the door. Henry shouted loudly, stating his serious intent for the divorce and ordering me never to come back. I responded firmly, telling him I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. Once we left, Henry bombarded me with messages and calls, which I ignored. I turned off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. I shared the recording of our conversation and the divorce papers with them. Although I had no love or affection left for Henry, I couldn't stop worrying about how this would affect William. My parents understood my concerns and advised me to do what I felt was best. They acknowledged that a divorce could be emotionally hard on William, but they also supported my decision. As I was grappling with the decision, William told me he was hungry. My mother, seeing the distress on my face, kindly made hamburgers, his favorite dish. Overcome with emotions, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother lovingly told William that the hamburgers were made so that he and I could visit her whenever we wanted. William eagerly took a bite and joyfully exclaimed, "Grand's hamburgers. I want to eat these every day." I smiled and said, "It's because the hamburgers are filled with the love I have for you." Then, in a sweet gesture, William took a big bite of his hamburger and offered it to me. His kindness broke me, and even though I tried to stop my tears, they kept flowing. Noticing my tears, my father reassured William that they were tears of happiness, not sadness. William, in a moment of understanding, hugged me, and my father's eyes turned bright red. I realized how blessed we were to be together as a family. I looked at William and remarked, "Family is precious." Surprised, William asked, "Did Dad say that only Arya is family?" My father gently confirmed it but then asked, "Would you like to live with us as family?" With a joyful laugh, William eagerly agreed, which made everyone smile. Despite still grappling with the idea of divorce, the meal was so warm and filled with love that I finally decided to part ways with Henry. I planned to tell William about it, even though my heart felt heavy. Yet somehow, I sensed that William already understood, even without me saying a word. The situation gradually settled, and William, in his innocence, expressed a desire to live as a family. He even embraced our pet dog, affectionately calling him his younger brother, despite the dog being older than him. His sweet gesture lightened the mood, and it felt like a small moment of joy amidst the turmoil. With my decision made, preparations for the divorce began in earnest. I contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father's, and together, we started formalizing the contract. The next day, we signed the necessary papers, and while I took in the weight of what was happening, my father and William shared comforting laughter in the other room. They were trying to lift my spirits, but I was still processing everything. As I lay in bed that night, I found myself reminiscing about my childhood, when life was simpler, and I never imagined I'd be facing such a complicated, painful decision. The following day, I checked my smartphone and found over 200 missed calls and messages from Henry. His emotional instability was evident in every message. I felt exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained, and I decided to turn off my phone to avoid hearing more. With the lawyer's help, we explained everything to my parents. We shared how Arya had accumulated a significant amount of debt due to her casino habits and shopping addiction, and how Henry had acted as her guarantor. It was becoming clearer why he had been acting so erratically. They had been planning to use my savings to cover Arya's debts, and it explained so much about his recent behavior. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted. Henry was devastated when he realized it was final, and I could hear him sobbing on the other end of the phone. It was strange, his tears didn't move me. After everything that had happened, I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for him. Despite the expectation of disagreements over child support, Henry agreed to sign a pledge to pay $340 every month for William's care. It was an amount that barely covered the essentials, but it was a small victory. Later, I received another call from Henry. His tone was different this time. There was no aggression. Instead, he calmly admitted to having manipulated me financially and explained his complex feelings toward Arya. He acknowledged his mistakes, but said nothing that could change my mind. I firmly stated that I had made my decision and wouldn't reconsider. I could hear his faint sobbing on the other end before he wished me happiness and hung up. I didn't even respond. As the call ended, I stayed strong, feeling a sense of resolve that I hadn't felt in months. I discussed my future plans with my parents. After much thought, I decided to stay with them until William grew up, giving us both the stability we needed. I resumed my role as the company president, something I had put on hold when Henry and I got married. I was determined to rebuild my life, not just for me, but for William as well. As time went on, I learned that Henry and Arya had informed their parents about the divorce and the mounting debts. The news was so shocking that it led to their disownment. For Henry, it was the final straw. His own family turned their back on him, leaving him to deal with the consequences of his actions. Looking back now, I find happiness in being with my family. We have our ups and downs, of course, but we have each other. I've come to realize that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who truly care, who lift you up when you're at your lowest, and who help you see the light at the end of the tunnel. I have William, my parents, and my own strength to carry me forward. In the end, that's what truly matters. I remember the first day I walked into the staff room at Eastwood High in Austin, Texas. It was just a few weeks after I graduated from college, and I was both nervous and excited to start my teaching career. It was 1985, and Robert, who was already a well-respected teacher there, was assigned as my mentor. He was 4 years older than me, with a calm demeanor and an air of authority that immediately drew me to him. From the moment we met, there was an undeniable spark between us. Robert was charming and supportive, and as he guided me through my early days at the school, I found myself looking forward to our interactions. It didn't take long for our professional relationship to turn personal. I was drawn to him in a way I hadn't expected, and it wasn't long before we started dating. The early days were magical. Robert's maturity and life experience were a perfect complement to my youthful enthusiasm. I was thrilled to be with someone who seemed to understand me so well. But our happiness was soon tested when I discovered I was pregnant. It was a surprise that came at a time when we were both still figuring things out. But rather than being a setback, it strengthened our bond. We married quickly, and I left my job to focus on becoming a full-time mother. Our lives changed dramatically. Robert continued teaching, and I devoted myself to raising our 3 children: our eldest daughter, Emma, who is now 38, our middle daughter, Lily, who is 35, and our youngest, Ben, who is 32. Those early years were busy and filled with challenges, but also with joy. I poured all my energy into nurturing our children, helping them with their schoolwork, and managing the household. It was a labor of love, but it was also exhausting. Robert was dedicated to his work, often bringing home stories from school and sharing his experiences. He was a loving father, though his commitment to his job meant he was frequently away from home. Despite the long hours he put in, I never minded. I was content with my role and the life we were building together. The children grew up, and I continued to manage our home, making sure everything ran smoothly. I was proud of the way they turned out. Emma, with her passion for art, Lily, who excelled in business, and Ben, who found his calling in engineering. As the years went by, I began to imagine a future where Robert and I could finally enjoy some leisure time together. Our children were growing up and becoming independent, which meant we could start thinking about ourselves. We talked about traveling, taking up new hobbies, and enjoying our second life together. I envisioned us exploring new places and spending quality time as a couple. But as Robert neared retirement, things began to change. It started with small complaints about the meals I prepared and the state of the house. At first, I thought it was just a phase or perhaps stress from his job. But as time went on, his criticisms became more frequent and intense. He began to nitpick everything I did, from how I cleaned the house to the way I managed our finances. It was confusing and hurtful. I had always put so much effort into making our home comfortable and our lives enjoyable, so his constant complaints seemed unwarranted. One evening, after a particularly harsh comment about the dinner I had made, I couldn't hold back my frustration. "Robert, why are you suddenly so critical of everything I do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up from his plate, his expression inscrutable. "It's just that I've been thinking about how things will be after I retire. I don't want to be stuck with the same old routine." I was taken aback. "But we've talked about this. We're going to enjoy our time together. Why are you bringing this up now?" Robert sighed, looking tired. "I don't know, Linda. It just feels like things need to change." I tried to understand, but his dissatisfaction seemed to deepen. I sought advice from our children, hoping they could offer some insight. Emma and Lily were supportive, though they were puzzled by their father's behavior. Ben, who was always more perceptive, mentioned something that made me uneasy. He joked, "Maybe Dad's having an affair or something. I mean, he's been acting really strange." At first, I dismissed it as a careless comment. But as Robert's behavior became increasingly erratic, I couldn't ignore the possibility. The thought of him being unfaithful was unbearable, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Determined to find out the truth, I made a decision that felt both drastic and necessary. I hired a private investigator to look into Robert's activities. It was an action I never thought I'd have to take, but the growing distance and his uncharacteristic behavior left me with no choice. Little did I know, this decision would set off a chain of events that would change my life forever. As the days passed and I waited for the investigator's report, I could feel the weight of the uncertainty pressing down on me. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy at home, but the strain was evident. Robert's discontent seemed to grow with each passing day, and I was left wondering how our relationship had come to this. I needed answers, and I was about to get them. The day the private investigator's report arrived, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. I could barely bring myself to open the envelope, but the need for answers drove me. Sitting alone in my study, I unfolded the report and began reading. Each line confirmed my worst fears. Robert was indeed having an affair with a younger woman named Jessica. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I had hoped for some mistake or misunderstanding, but the evidence was clear. Robert had been meeting Jessica frequently, and the investigator had captured photos of them together. The betrayal was not just emotional but also deeply personal, shattering the image of our life together that I had clung to for so long. I kept the report hidden and tried to maintain a facade of normalcy at home. Robert's retirement was approaching, and I had to prepare myself for the inevitable confrontation. I found an apartment in a quiet part of town, far enough from the life we had built together, but close enough to be accessible. I needed a place to go if Robert decided to force me out, and having a backup plan gave me a small sense of control amid the chaos. As Robert's retirement date drew nearer, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He complained more about everything, from the cleanliness of the house to the way I managed our finances. I was used to his criticism, but now it felt like a prelude to something more significant. Our conversations became terse, and the warmth that once defined our relationship was replaced by a cold formality. One evening, after a particularly harsh exchange over dinner, Robert made a statement that was both shocking and revealing. "Linda, I've been thinking," he said, his tone clipped. "Once I retire, I don't see the point in keeping the charade. I want a divorce." I was stunned.
"What?
"After all these years, you want to just walk away?" Robert leaned back in his chair, looking resolute. "Yes, I do. I'm planning on keeping all my retirement money, which I estimate to be over $320,000. You'll be left with nothing, and I won't have to deal with your constant complaints anymore." His words were like a knife to my heart. I was hurt and angry, but I kept my composure. "Is this how you're going to end things? Just like that?" Robert's expression was a mix of irritation and satisfaction. "It's what I've decided. I've been putting up with too much, and I'm ready to move on." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and composed myself. I had to think clearly and act wisely. Robert's confidence in his plan only fueled my resolve. I knew I had to be prepared for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, I made sure to finalize the details of my new apartment and secure my financial situation. My work as a teacher had provided me with a decent income, and my careful savings meant I wasn't entirely dependent on Robert. I also made sure to document everything about our financial situation, including the retirement account that Robert was so eager to keep. Robert's behavior grew more erratic and impatient as his retirement date approached. He seemed to be in a constant state of agitation, and his criticism of me became even more pointed. I could sense that he was preparing for a major change, and I had to match his determination with my own readiness. On the day of Robert's retirement party at the school, I felt a sense of foreboding. It was meant to be a celebration, but for me, it was a reminder of the impending confrontation. As Robert received his colleagues' congratulations and accolades, I watched from the sidelines, my mind racing with thoughts of how I would handle the situation once we were alone. When we finally returned home, Robert wasted no time. "It's time to discuss the details of our separation," he said bluntly. "I'll keep the retirement funds, and you'll have to manage on your own." I looked him straight in the eye. "You don't get to decide everything on your own. I've been preparing for this, and I'm not going to walk away empty-handed." Robert's face showed a flicker of surprise, but he quickly masked it with a dismissive smile. "What are you talking about?" "I know about Jessica," I said, taking a deep breath. "And I have evidence of your affair. If this is how you want to end things, then fine. But I'm not going to be left with nothing. I'll be seeking alimony and my fair share of the retirement funds." Robert's expression shifted from surprise to anger. "You think you can just take me for everything I have?" "I think it's only fair," I said, standing my ground. "I've given up so much for this marriage. I'm not going to let you walk away without facing the consequences." The tension in the room was palpable. Robert seemed to be caught off guard by my readiness and resolve. It was clear that he hadn't anticipated me being so prepared. As the confrontation continued, I could feel the weight of the situation lifting slightly from my shoulders. I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life, and the path forward was starting to become clearer. The days after Robert's retirement party were a whirlwind of activity. I spent my time organizing my new apartment, making it feel like home, and preparing for the legal battle ahead. The reality of our situation began to sink in, and the uncertainty of the future was daunting, but I felt a growing sense of empowerment. I wasn't going to let Robert's betrayal define me. Robert's arrogance persisted, and he seemed to believe that his plan was foolproof. He made no effort to hide his disdain for me. The few times we spoke, he was dismissive and condescending. "I hope you're ready for the reality of living on your own," he'd say with a smirk. "You'll have to manage without my support." It was a challenge, but I was ready. I spent time with my lawyer, gathering evidence and preparing my case. I wanted to ensure that everything was in order so that Robert couldn't exploit any loopholes. My lawyer was confident that I had a strong case, and this bolstered my resolve. One afternoon, as I was sorting through documents in my new apartment, I received a call from my lawyer. "Linda, I have some important news," he said. "We've scheduled a meeting with Robert to discuss the terms of the divorce and the division of assets." My heart raced. This was the moment I had been preparing for. "When is it?" "Next Monday," he replied. "Be ready. We'll go over everything beforehand." The meeting day arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves and determination. Robert and I sat across from each other at the lawyer's office, and the tension was almost unbearable. My lawyer began by outlining the terms of the divorce and the division of assets. He presented the evidence of Robert's affair and made it clear that I would be seeking a fair share of the retirement funds and alimony. Robert's initial reaction was one of surprise and irritation. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I've already told you my terms. Why are we wasting time with all this?" I took a deep breath and addressed Robert directly. "I've worked hard for many years, and I deserve a fair share of what we've built together. I'm not just going to walk away without fighting for my rights." The meeting was intense, with Robert growing increasingly agitated as the discussions went on. He tried to undermine my claims, but my lawyer was prepared with all the necessary documentation. The conversation shifted to the financial aspects, and Robert's demeanor changed from defiant to defensive. When the topic of his retirement funds came up, Robert's frustration was palpable. "You think you're entitled to everything?" he barked. "Those funds are mine." I looked him squarely in the eyes. "It's not about entitlement. It's about fairness. I contributed to this marriage and the life we built together. I'm entitled to my share." The discussion continued for several hours, with neither side backing down. Eventually, we reached a preliminary agreement on the division of assets and alimony. Robert agreed to a settlement that included a portion of the retirement funds and regular alimony payments. While it wasn't everything I had hoped for, it was a significant step towards achieving some measure of justice. As I left the office, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The battle wasn't over, but I had taken a crucial step in reclaiming control over my life. The agreement was a testament to my resolve and the hard work I had put into preparing for this moment. In the weeks that followed, I focused on adjusting to my new life. I continued teaching, which provided a sense of normalcy and purpose. I also spent time with my children and grandchildren, cherishing the moments we had together. My newfound independence was liberating, and I began to embrace the opportunities that lay ahead. Robert, on the other hand, faced a more difficult path. His new relationship with Jessica was strained, and the financial strain of the alimony payments took a toll. His children, disillusioned by his actions, chose to distance themselves from him. The isolation he experienced was a stark contrast to the life he had envisioned. As I moved forward, I took solace in knowing that I had faced the challenges head-on and emerged stronger. The journey wasn't easy, but it was mine to navigate, and I was determined to make the most of it. As the months passed, I found myself settling into a new rhythm of life. My apartment, once a place of uncertainty, had become a haven of peace and independence. I embraced each day with a sense of purpose and gratitude, appreciating the newfound freedom that had come from overcoming such a tumultuous period. The transition wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of loneliness and times when I missed the comfort of having a partner by my side. Yet, these feelings were overshadowed by the joy of reclaiming my life and the support of my children. Their visits became a source of comfort and strength, reminding me of the love and connection that were still very much present in my life. My work as a teacher continued to be a rewarding and stabilizing force. I found solace in my students and the classroom environment, where I could focus on something I loved and felt passionate about. Teaching allowed me to channel my energy into something positive and fulfilling, reinforcing my sense of self-worth and purpose. Meanwhile, Robert's situation continued to unravel. His relationship with Jessica, the younger woman he had cheated on me with, deteriorated rapidly. The financial strain from the alimony payments was more than he had anticipated, and Jessica left him once it became clear that he couldn't provide the lifestyle she had hoped for. To make matters worse, Robert's children chose to maintain their distance from him, disillusioned by his actions and the pain he had caused. I remember the day I heard about Robert's predicament. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was enjoying a quiet cup of tea when my eldest daughter called. "Mom, have you heard about Dad?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I braced myself for the news. "What's happened?" I asked. "It's not good," she said. "He's struggling financially, and Jessica has left him. The kids are not interested in maintaining a relationship with him, and he's all alone." The news didn't come as a shock. Over the months, I had watched Robert's life slowly crumble under the weight of his own decisions. While I felt a pang of sympathy, I also felt a sense of justice. He had betrayed not only me but also his own family. His downfall was a harsh reminder of the consequences of his actions. As for me, my focus remained on building a fulfilling and joyful life. I took up new hobbies, such as painting and gardening, which brought me immense satisfaction. I also continued to nurture my relationships with my children and grandchildren, enjoying the special moments we shared. The holidays were particularly meaningful, filled with laughter and love, which reinforced the importance of family and connection in my life. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching sunset, I reflected on how far I had come. I thought about the years of sacrifice and dedication, the pain of betrayal, and the journey to reclaim my independence. It was a journey that had transformed me, making me stronger and more self-assured than I had ever been before. I realized that the challenges I faced had ultimately led to a greater understanding of myself and what I wanted out of life. I had learned to appreciate the value of self-reliance and the power of resilience. The experience had taught me that while life could be unpredictable and difficult, it was also filled with opportunities for growth and renewal. As I closed that chapter of my life, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had navigated the complexities of betrayal and divorce, and I had emerged with a renewed sense of purpose and joy. My life was no longer defined by the past, but by the possibilities of the future. The story of my journey was one of self-discovery and empowerment. It was about facing adversity with courage and embracing the freedom to live on my own terms. I had found strength in the midst of heartache, and I was ready to continue writing my own story, one filled with hope and new beginnings. And so, as the sun set over Austin, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life I had built and the lessons I had learned. The future was mine to shape, and I was determined to make it as bright and fulfilling as possible.
The phone felt wrong in my hands. Not my phone, his phone. The one Brandon thought he'd hidden so carefully beneath his car seat, wrapped in an old t-shirt like some precious artifact. Precious indeed. My thumb hovered over the screen, muscles twitching with the effort not to swipe. To maintain that last thread of trust, that final strand of ignorance that might save our marriage. I'm Emilia, and this moment would divide my life into before and after. The craft store where I worked part-time had closed early, a burst pipe flooding the back room. I'd driven to Brandon's office, thinking I'd surprise him, maybe suggest dinner at that Italian place he loved. His car sat empty in the parking lot, but his laptop bag was on the passenger seat. He always forgot something. That's when I saw it. The edge of fabric, too deliberately placed to be accidental. Now I stood in the empty lot, heart hammering against my ribs, while my sister's name blazed across the screen. Samantha, 10 missed calls, 23 unread messages. The most recent, meet me at our spot. We need to finalize everything. Our spot, their spot. My fingers moved without permission, opening the message thread. The words blurred, then sharpened with cruel clarity. I can't wait to start our life together. Just a few more weeks until we tell her. You're right. Emilia won't understand. She never could match your ambitions. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the asphalt. I caught it before it could shatter, though part of me wanted to watch it break, to destroy this evidence of destruction. A car door slammed nearby. I looked up to see Brandon striding across the lot, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, in that casual way he thought made him look more approachable. He stopped dead when he saw me. What are you doing here? I held up the phone. Looking for you. Found something else instead. The color drained from his face, leaving him ashen under the fluorescent lights. I can explain. Explain what? How long you've been fucking my sister, or how you two planned to break it to me. He took a step forward, hands raised like he was approaching a wounded animal. It's not what you think. Samantha and I don't. The word cut through the air between us. Don't you dare say her name to me. We never meant to hurt you. A laugh bubbled up, bitter as bile. No? Then why hide the phone? Why all the secret meetings at your spot? His face hardened, that mask of contrition slipping to reveal something uglier beneath. You wouldn't understand. Samantha gets me, gets what I want from life, while you're content playing with glitter and glue at that pathetic little store. Content. The word tasted like ashes. I took that job so you could chase your precious career dreams. I supported you, believed in you, and I'm grateful, but grateful. I hurled the phone at his chest. He caught it reflexively, clutching it like the betrayal it represented. Show your gratitude by telling me how long. How long have you been planning to leave me for my own sister? Brandon's silence was answer enough. I turned away, my mind already racing ahead, calculating, planning. He called after me, but his words were lost in the roar of blood in my ears. I drove home on autopilot, my hands steady on the wheel even as my world imploded. In our driveway, I sat staring at our house, my house, with its perfectly trimmed lawn and cheerful window boxes, all facade, just like our marriage. My phone buzzed. Jordan, my best friend, checking in as she did most evenings. I let it ring, not ready to voice this betrayal aloud. Not yet. First, I needed to think, to plan. They wanted to destroy my life? Fine, but they'd learned that Karma has a sister too, and her name is Revenge. Sunday dinner at the Carters had always been sacred. Now, watching Brandon pass the mashed potatoes to his mother with that practiced smile, I wondered how many of these dinners he'd sat through while planning to destroy everything. "The garden looks lovely, Olivia," I said, cutting my roast into precise squares. "Those new roses really brighten up the back fence." "Oh, thank you, dear. Samantha actually suggested them." Olivia beamed. "Speaking of," she sends her regrets, "something about a client emergency." My fork scraped against the plate. Henry, sitting at the head of the table, shot me a sharp look. He'd been a cop long enough to read tension in a room. Client emergency. The words tasted like poison. Funny how those keep happening on family nights. Brandon's knuckles whitened around his wine glass. What kind of emergency, Brandon? Maybe you know, since you two spend so much time together." The clatter of silverware stopped. Olivia's fork hung suspended between plate and mouth, her eyes darting between us. Henry set down his knife with deliberate care. "I don't know what you're implying," Brandon said, his voice steady but his jaw twitching. "Samantha and I occasionally consult on business matters." "Is that what you call it?" I pulled out his second phone, the one I'd kept after our parking lot confrontation, and placed it on the table. "Consulting?" Olivia gasped. "Brandon, what's going on?" "Nothing, Mom. Amelia's just upset about finding out my husband and sister are planning their future together." "You're right. I'm a bit upset about that." The silence that followed was absolute. Henry pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against hardwood. "Brandon, explain, now." "It's not what you think." Brandon stood, pacing like a caged animal. "Samantha understands me. She gets what I'm trying to build, my ambitions. While Amelia's content to waste her life in that craft store, that store paid our bills while you chased promotions. I cut in. While you spent money we didn't have on suits and watches to impress people who didn't care. I was building something." He slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "Something bigger than glitter and glue, and this small-town mentality. Samantha sees that. She believes in me." "Brandon Carter." Olivia's voice cracked like a whip. "Are you telling me you've been with your sister-in-law?" "It's complicated, Mom." "No," Henry said, his quiet tone more damning than any shout. "It's really not." Brandon turned to his father, desperation creeping into his voice. "Dad, you understand ambition. You always taught me to reach higher. I taught you about honor." Henry's face had hardened into the expression I imagined he'd used on criminals in his police days. "About loyalty, about being a man worth respecting. I am respecting myself, my dreams, my potential. By betraying your wife with her sister." Olivia's hands trembled as she folded her napkin. "The girl who sat at this table every Sunday for 8 years, who helped me through my surgery last spring." Brandon's facade cracked. For a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Then his phone buzzed, his regular phone this time. He glanced at it, and something in his expression shifted. "I need to go." "Of course you do," I said. "She's calling, isn't she?" He didn't answer, just grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Olivia called after him, but Henry caught her arm. "Let him go, Liv. He's made his choice." I stood, my legs surprisingly steady. "I should go too. Thank you for dinner." "Emilia." Henry's voice stopped me at the threshold. "Whatever you're planning, and I know you're planning something, remember who you are." I turned back, meeting his knowing gaze. "I'm remembering exactly who I am, and who they are." Outside, I watched Brandon's taillights disappear around the corner, probably heading to their special spot. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. "Did you do it?" "Yes," I typed back. Family dinner went exactly as expected. Time for phase 2. Because while Brandon was rushing to meet my sister, he had no idea I'd already met with his company's financial auditor, or that tomorrow, some very interesting documents would land on his boss's desk. "Let them have their spot," I had bigger plans. Jordan's office always smelled like coffee and printer ink. Today, those familiar scents mixed with something else. Opportunity. She spread the financial documents across her desk, each page a nail in Brandon's coffin. These aren't just expense reports, she said, tapping a highlighted column. He's been moving company funds through shell accounts for months. Look at these transfers. I leaned closer, scanning the numbers. All to the same design firm, Samantha's firm, which doesn't actually exist. Jordan pulled up a website on her computer. Beautiful website, though, very professional. But dig deeper, and there's nothing. No business license, no tax records, no actual clients besides your husband's company. My stomach clenched. She's been running a scam. Not her first either. Jordan opened another tab. Remember when you mentioned she lived in Seattle for a year? I did some digging. Found 3 different interior design businesses registered under variations of her name. All dissolved after complaints of fraud. The pieces clicked together like a twisted puzzle. The expensive clothes, the constant business trips, the way she always seemed to have money despite never having steady work. She's been playing this game for years. Jordan's journalist instincts were practically vibrating, and Brandon's just her latest mark. My phone buzzed, Henry calling. I ignored it. How much has Brandon given her? Nearly $200,000 over the past 8 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. All those times Brandon had insisted we couldn't afford to fix the roof, or replace my dying car, or start the family we'd once planned. There's more, Jordan said quietly. Look at these dates. I followed her finger across the spreadsheet. The first transfer was dated exactly 1 year ago, 3 months before I'd found the phone. Before I knew about their affair. She targeted him, I whispered. This whole thing, she planned it from the start. Emilia. The office door burst open. Samantha stood there, designer handbag, clutched like a shield. Her perfect makeup not quite hiding her panic. What are you doing? She strode toward the desk, reaching for the papers. I snatched them away. Research, Jordan said coolly. Fascinating stuff about interior design fraud. Care to comment? This is family business. Samantha's voice shook slightly. You have no right. Family? I stood, forcing her to step back. Like when you had the right to seduce my husband, or steal his money. I love him, she insisted. You never understood him. What he needs. What he needs. I laughed. The sound sharp enough to make her flinch. Let me guess, expensive gifts, secret accounts, just like David in Seattle, or Michael in Portland. The color drained from her face. How did you? You're not as clever as you think, Sam. Did Brandon know about the others? About how this little game of yours usually ends? She recovered quickly, her lips curving into that familiar manipulative smile. You're just jealous. Brandon chose me because you're a better con artist than wife. I spread the documents between us. These numbers tell a different story. Wonder what Brandon will think when he sees them. Or his company's board. You wouldn't dare. But uncertainty flickered in her eyes. It would destroy him. Like you planned to. I stepped closer, dropping my voice. I know about the account in your name. The one where you've been moving his money. Were you going to disappear with it, like you did to the others? Her mask cracked. For a moment, I saw the scared little girl who'd always competed with me, always needed to take what was mine. I can explain everything to Brandon. Too late. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Henry now. The company's auditors already have copies. They're probably talking to him right now. As if on cue, her phone rang. Brandon's name flashed on the screen. She stared at it, paralyzed. Better answer that, Jordan said. Sounds important. Samantha backed toward the door, her carefully constructed world crumbling. This isn't over. Actually, I said, watching her retreat, I think it is. After she fled, Jordan touched my arm. You okay? I looked at the documents that would destroy my husband and sister. No, but I will be. My phone buzzed again. Henry. This time, I answered. "It's done," he said without preamble. "Brandon just confessed everything to the board. They're pressing charges." I closed my eyes, victory tasting both sweet and bitter. Good. Sometimes karma needs a little help. The craft store's bell chimed as Olivia walked in, looking out of place among the yarn displays and glitter aisles. She clutched her purse like armor, her wedding ring catching the fluorescent light as she approached my register. "They've frozen his accounts," she said without preamble. "All of them, even our joint family savings." I continued restocking the ribbon display, each spool clicking into place with mechanical precision. That tends to happen in fraud investigations. "He's my son, Emilia," her voice cracked. "Whatever he's done, he's still my son." The purple ribbon slipped from my fingers, unspooling across the counter. "And Samantha was my sister. Funny how family works. The police came to our house this morning." Olivia's hands trembled as she tried to help gather the ribbon. Henry couldn't even look at them, his old colleagues, asking questions about his own son. The weight of it hit me then. How many lives were unraveling because of my revenge? Not just Brandon and Samantha, but Henry's reputation in the department he'd served for 30 years. Olivia's, standing in her church groups, the whispers that would follow them all. My phone buzzed. "Jordan, Channel 5 breaking news about tech firm fraud, running story at 6. "I know what you did," Olivia said quietly. "Henry told me about the evidence, how you gathered it, how you waited." "Did he tell you everything? About the other women Samantha conned? The money Brandon stole?" "Yes," she met my eyes. "And about how you made sure the story would break just before the company's merger announcement. Maximum damage. The ribbon tangled between us like a metaphor. They deserved it." "Maybe." Olivia reached across the counter, her fingers cool against my wrist. "But what about you, dear? What's all this doing to you?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on destroying them, I hadn't noticed the cost to myself. The sleepless nights, the bitter taste that never quite left my mouth, the way I flinched every time my phone rang. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." She gestured around the store. "You're hiding here, surrounding yourself with pretty things while you orchestrate destruction. That's not the Emilia I know. The Emilia you knew died when she found that phone." "Did she, or is she just lost?" Olivia pulled something from her purse, an old photo, Brandon and me on our wedding day, Samantha standing beside us, all of us laughing at some forgotten joke. Because the girl in this photo, she knew how to love without destroying, how to hurt without burning everything down. My chest tightened. That girl was naive. That girl was strong. Olivia's voice hardened. Stronger than this version, who thinks revenge will fill the holes they left. My phone buzzed again. "Jordan, Brandon trying to reach you. Says it's urgent." "They made their choices," I said, but the words felt hollow. "Yes, they did." Olivia headed for the door, then paused. "But you're making choices too, Emilia. And someday, when all this is over, you'll have to live with them." After she left, I stared at the tangled ribbon, purple as a bruise against the counter's white surface. My phone kept buzzing. Jordan, Henry, numbers I didn't recognize. Probably reporters, now that the story was breaking. I thought of Brandon's face at that family dinner, the moment his mask slipped. Of Samantha in Jordan's office, her carefully constructed world crumbling. Of Henry and Olivia, collateral damage in my quest for justice. The store's bell chimed again. I looked up, expecting another customer, but instead saw my own reflection in the darkening window. A stranger with hard eyes and tight lips, surrounded by crafting supplies meant to create beautiful things. When had I become someone who only knew how to destroy? My phone buzzed one final time. "Brandon, please, I need to tell you something about Samantha, something you don't know." I let it ring, watching the ribbon unspool further across the counter, wondering if there was any way to gather up all these loose ends without getting more tangled in the process. The cafe where Samantha wanted to meet was exactly her style. Overpriced lattes and exposed brick walls. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where I could watch the door. Jordan sat at the counter, pretending to work on her laptop while actually recording everything. Samantha swept in 15 minutes late, designer sunglasses hiding what looked like sleepless nights. You're looking, well, amazing what a clear conscience does for the complexion. She slid into the seat across from me, removing her glasses. We need to talk about Brandon. Funny, he said the same thing about you. I pushed my untouched coffee aside, right before the police questioned him about the missing funds. You don't understand what you've done. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table. The company's board, the investigation, you're destroying everything. Like you destroyed my marriage. That marriage was dead long before I came along. She leaned forward, voice dropping. Brandon was suffocating in this town, in that life you built around your little craft store dreams. I just showed him what he could become. A thief. An ambitious man with potential. Her lip curled. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? Always playing it safe. Always so small. The barista dropped a mug somewhere behind us. The crash echoed like my racing heart. Small. I pulled out my phone, showing her the screen. Like these bank transfers, 200,000 is a pretty big number, Sam. Wonder what the police will think about where it all went. Color drained from her face. You wouldn't. Already did. The evidence is with the investigators. I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my face. But that's not even the interesting part. Want to know what I found when I dug deeper? She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. This conversation is over. Sit down. The steel in my voice surprised us both. Or I call the detective right now and tell him about Michael Porter and David Chen and all the others. Samantha sank back down, hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water. You see, I continued, Brandon wasn't special. He was just the latest in a long line of men you've conned. But you got sloppy this time, got personal, chose your own sister's husband. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I pushed my phone closer, showing her the evidence Jordan had gathered. Because from here, it looks like you've been running this same scam for years. Seduce, manipulate, embezzle, vanish. How many lives have you ruined, Sam? You don't know anything about my life. But her voice wavered. The things I've had to do. To survive? I laughed harshly. Save it for your lawyer. She reached across the table, grabbing my wrist. Amelia, please, if this gets out, I'll lose everything. Like I lost everything? I can make it right. Desperation crept into her tone. Brandon and we can give back the money. We'll leave town, never contact you again. My phone buzzed. Henry calling again. I ignored it. Too late. I stood, gathering my things. The police already have everything. And Brandon? I checked my watch. Should be in custody by now. You bitch. All pretense dropped from her face. You really think you've won? That destroying us will make you feel better? No. I looked down at her. This sister I'd once loved. Now a stranger wearing familiar features. But watching you lose everything, that's a start. As I turned to leave, she called after me. He never loved you, you know, not really. You were just convenient. I paused at the door, not turning back. Maybe. But at least I never had to pretend to be someone else to get that love. Outside, Jordan fell into step beside me. Got it all recorded. You okay? I watched Samantha through the window, her head bowed over her phone, probably trying to warn Brandon too late. My phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert about arrests at Brandon's company. No, I said honestly, but I will be. The satisfaction felt hollow, like winning a game where everyone loses. But as police cars screamed past us toward the financial district, I realized there was no turning back now. The dominoes were falling. All I could do was watch. The police station's interview room smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Brandon sat across from me, orange jumpsuit, replacing his usual designer suits, dark circles under his eyes, making him look older than his 34 years. You won, he said flatly. Happy now, I studied the man I'd once loved, searching for any trace of the person I'd married. This isn't about winning. No? He leaned forward, chains rattling. Then why are you here? Come to watch me break? Through the observation window, I could sense Henry watching, his presence a silent weight. He'd pulled strings to arrange this meeting, though I wasn't sure why I'd agreed to come. Samantha's gone, I said. Disappeared right after your arrest. Funny how that works. Something cracked in Brandon's expression. She wouldn't. She did. Along with what was left in your accounts. I slid a bank statement across the table. She cleaned you out 3 hours before the police arrived, almost like she knew they were coming. His hands shook as he read the numbers. This isn't possible. We had plans. A future. Like we had plans. A future. That was different, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Samantha understood me, understood how to use you. I pulled out another document, evidence of Samantha's previous cons, just like she understood Michael Porter and David Chen and all the others. The color drained from his face. What are you talking about? You're perfect, Samantha. She's done this before, multiple times. Seduce, steal, vanish. You weren't special, Brandon, just convenient. He lunged across the table, hands reaching for me. The guard moved fast, but not before I saw something break behind Brandon's eyes. You're lying, he snarled as they restrained him. This is just more of your revenge. Ask your lawyer to look up Michael Porter's case. Or better yet, ask your father. He knew. Tried to warn you months ago. Brandon went still. Dad knew. He was a cop for 30 years. Did you think he wouldn't investigate the woman destroying his son's marriage? The fight drained from him suddenly, leaving him slumped in his chair. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know what you threw everything away for. I stood, gathering my things. And because now, you know exactly how it feels to be betrayed by someone you trusted. Emilia, wait. His voice cracked. Please, I need your help. The company's pressing charges. I'm looking at serious time. Should have thought of that before you stole from them. For her, he laughed bitterly. All of it was for her. The money, the lies, betraying you. I did it all because I thought she loved me. Something tight in my chest finally unraveled. That's the difference between us, Brandon. I never needed someone else's love to know my worth. As I turned to leave, he called out one last time. I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't matter now, but you're right. I paused at the door. It doesn't. Henry was waiting in the hallway, his face grim. You okay? No. I leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. None of this feels like victory. Revenge rarely does. My phone buzzed, Jordan calling. Probably with news about Samantha's trail going cold. Another dead end in this mess I'd created. I destroyed him, I whispered. Destroyed our whole family. And for what? It doesn't fix anything. Henry touched my shoulder. Sometimes things need to break completely before they can heal right. Through the window, I watched Brandon being led away. Shoulders bowed under the weight of his choices. In his defeated posture, I saw my own reflection, both of us trapped in cycles of destruction we'd created. Come on, Henry said gently. Olivia's waiting. Family dinner tonight. Family? I laughed hollowly. What's left of it? More than you think. He guided me toward the exit. And maybe that's the real victory here. Finding out what remains after everything burns down. Outside, rain fell softly, washing away another layer of who I used to be. I wondered if, somewhere in all this wreckage, I could find pieces worth salvaging, of myself, of family, of hope. But first, I had to face what I'd become in pursuit of justice. Jordan burst into my craft store, face flushed with urgency. She's back. Samantha's at your house. My scissors clattered against the counter. What? Police tracked her card usage. She came back to clear out the safe in your basement. Jordan grabbed my arm. Henry's already on his way. The drive home was a blur of red lights and racing thoughts. My house came into view. Our house, where Brandon and I had once planned a future. Samantha's sleek car sat in the driveway, looking exactly like the expensive lie it was. I found her in the master bedroom, methodically emptying drawers. She didn't even turn around. Took you long enough, she said, tossing another handful of jewelry into her bag. Though I suppose you've always been slow to catch on. Step away from the safe, Sam. She finally faced me, and I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished exterior, replaced by something harder, desperate. Or what? You'll call the police? They're already coming, aren't they? Why did you come back? Because this was mine first. She gestured around the room. All of it. The life, the status, the future. I was always meant for more than you. So you took everything I had? You had everything I wanted. The words exploded from her. The perfect marriage, the loving family, the simple little life that somehow made you happy. Do you know how infuriating that was, watching my little sister be content with mediocrity? Sirens wailed in the distance. Her eyes darted to the window. They're not just coming for the money, I said quietly. They know about the others, all of them. Something dangerous flickered across her face. You think you've won. That exposing me somehow makes you better. She reached into her bag. I'm not going to prison. The gun looked wrong in her manicured hands. My heart hammered, but my voice remained steady. This isn't you, Sam. You don't know who I am. The weapon shook slightly. You never did. None of you did. I know you're scared. That you've been running so long, you've forgotten how to stop. Shut up! She stepped closer, gun leveled at my chest. You don't get to analyze me, not after what you did. What I did, I laughed, the sound harsh in the tense air. I learned from the best, sister. You taught me how to destroy someone's life. I just turned out to be a better student than you expected. The sirens grew closer, sweat beaded on her forehead. You know what's funny? I took a step forward. I won. Even with the gun, even with everything you've stolen, I still won. Because tomorrow you'll still be running. Still pretending. Still empty. I said, shut up. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The bedroom door burst open. Henry stood there, his service weapon drawn. Drop it, Samantha. She spun toward him, and I moved. The gun clattered across the floor as we both went down. She fought like a cornered animal, all nails and fury, but years of craft store inventory had made me stronger than she expected. I hate you, she sobbed as Henry pulled her away. I hate that you're better than me. I'm not better. I watched as officers cuffed her. I just finally stopped trying to be you. Later, sitting on my front steps with Jordan, I watched them load Samantha into a police car. Henry approached, holding a familiar object. Found this in her bag. He handed me my mother's wedding ring, the one thing of value I'd thought permanently lost. Thought you might want it back. I turned the ring over in my hands, remembering how proud Mom had been to pass it down. How devastated she'd have been to see what her daughters became. What happens now? Jordan asked softly. Through the police car window, I caught Samantha's eye one last time. In her defeated expression, I saw a mirror of my own vengeful path, and suddenly knew what I had to do next. Now, I slipped the ring into my pocket. Now I stopped letting the past define my future. The police car pulled away, taking with it the last pieces of who we used to be. Tomorrow would bring Brandon's sentencing. More family fallout, more wounds to heal. But for now, I sat between my best friend and my father-in-law, watching the sun set on the battlefield of what once was home. The realtor's sold sign lay flat in our front yard, knocked down by last night's storm. I picked it up, brushing off wet leaves before replanting it firmly in the soil. Behind me, the moving truck waited, already loaded with what remained of my old life. Henry appeared at my side, carrying the last box from the garage. Found these in the corner, mostly photo albums. Burned them. Emilia. His voice carried that familiar weight of wisdom. Some memories are worth keeping, even the painful ones. Inside, Olivia wrapped cups and newspaper, her methodical movements masking deeper tremors. The kitchen where we'd shared so many family dinners now echoed with emptiness. Brandon's sentencing is tomorrow, she said, not looking up. 5 years, with possibility of parole. And Samantha? 7, no parole. Henry set the box down. Plus, restitution to her other victims. Jordan breezed in through the back door, carrying coffee for everyone. The story's running tomorrow, front page. Guess I'll be famous, I said dryly. You're already famous at the craft store, Jordan grinned. 3 new classes added since you became owner. That had been unexpected. My boss retiring, offering to sell me the store. Even more unexpected was discovering I had the strength to say yes, to build something from the ashes of destruction. Found it, Olivia called, pulling something from a drawer. My mother's recipe box, its corners worn smooth from years of use. You should have this. I can't. Yes, you can. She pressed it into my hands. Family isn't just about blood, dear. It's about who stays when the storm hits. The box felt heavy with more than just recipes. I opened it, finding a familiar card tucked inside. My wedding invitation, preserved like a pressed flower. I saved it, Olivia said softly, to remind myself that beautiful beginnings don't guarantee beautiful endings. But ugly endings don't erase the beauty that came before. Through the window, I watched the morning sun illuminate my garden. The roses I'd planted after finding Brandon's phone had bloomed, their thorny stems stronger for surviving winter's frost. You never told me, I said to Henry, about warning Brandon about Samantha. He sighed, age lines deepening around his eyes. Would it have changed anything? No, but I wish I'd known I wasn't alone in seeing through her. You were never alone. Jordan squeezed my shoulder. You just needed to remember who you were without them. The moving truck's horn honked. Time to go. We did one final walk through, our footsteps echoing through empty rooms that once held so many dreams. In the master bedroom, I paused at the wall, where Brandon and I had marked our height changes over the years. The pencil marks told a story of growth neither of us had noticed happening. Ready? Henry asked from the doorway. I traced the highest mark, dated just weeks before finding the phone. I thought revenge would feel better than this. Revenge is easy, he said. Healing is harder. But worth it, Olivia added, appearing beside him. Outside, I locked the door one last time. The key felt different now, no longer a symbol of what I'd lost, but of what I'd chosen to leave behind. Jordan waited in her car, ready to follow the moving truck to my new place. Henry and Olivia stood by their vehicle, no longer my in-laws, but something more genuine, family by choice rather than law. You know, Olivia said, hugging me goodbye, sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. I thought of Brandon in his cell, of Samantha facing her consequences, of all the carefully constructed lies they'd built and lost. Their choices had shaped my path, but they no longer defined my destination. The morning sun caught my mother's ring, now worn on my right hand, a reminder that legacy is what we choose to carry forward, not what weighs us down. Living well, I echoed, climbing into my car. I can do that. Behind me, the house stood silent, holding its secrets and scars. Ahead, the road stretched toward something new, not a happy ending perhaps, but an honest beginning. And sometimes, that's enough.